After 12 years of marriage, I assumed that Vanessa and I had established our rhythm and that life would be stable by now. We're not the ostentatious couple that toured the globe or hosted lavish parties, but I believed we had something strong. I felt that our two children, Liam and Chloe, and the little rituals that come with being a parent, were the center of our existence. Our lives had been characterized by quiet evenings on the couch watching old movies, weekend soccer matches, and weeknight dinners. Although it wasn't glitzy, it was ours, and I always believed Vanessa and I were solid. As she progressed in her job, I tried to be her teammate because she had been my pillar of support during the highs and lows of my career. She recently received a promotion, which came with new coworkers and greater responsibility. She frequently referenced one in particular. At first, I didn't give it much thought, especially when Vanessa referred to Derek as, "Derek stated this" in the meeting, or "Derek had a fantastic project idea." He was just another employee, I thought. But after a few weeks, his name started to come up in almost every discussion. I attempted to dismiss it, reminding myself that Vanessa had always been dependable and that I had no cause to doubt her. Nevertheless, the way she talked about Derek in her stories made me feel like he was evolving beyond just a name. "Titan," I told him, with a twinge of admiration and a gleam in her eye. After all, she was my wife and she loved me, so I was just being paranoid. However, it was difficult to overlook Vanessa's changes. She began working longer hours and returning home later with unclear reasons. When she was at home, she made excuses about team dinners and project deadlines. I would inquire about her day from a distance as she was absorbed in her phone or laptop, but her responses were snippets of dialogue that bordered on rehearsed arguments. One evening when we sat down to eat, Chloe said, "You're always working. Mama, can't Derek handle it for once?" Liam moaned, rolling his eyes. Vanessa gave him a stern look, and I stayed quiet, but the remark stuck in my head. As we lay in bed that night, the kids even noticed her absence. I chose to bring up the fact that she'd been working a lot recently. I said this cautiously so as not to begin another altercation. "Vanessa is simply busy," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "Yes, Daniel, you understand how it is," she said, but I responded with a harder tone now. "Yet it feels like you're putting work before us and the kids." She glanced at me with a look of exhaustion and annoyance. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Derek and I are in charge of a significant project. I can't just abandon it," she continued, her face hardening. I decided not to press farther because I had a lump in my throat, but I could feel the tension between us. As the days stretched into weeks, our family was starting to fall apart. As the rifts in our marriage deepened, Vanessa was increasingly agitated and would lash out at me for the little things I asked. She tried to avoid being at home as much as possible, and when she was, I felt as though her thoughts were elsewhere. I started to emotionally withdraw, unsure of where things stood between us. The love and laughter that had previously characterized our relationship were replaced by disputes and silence when I tried to approach her. I began to fear returning home because I knew our chats would either end in an argument or a dismissive, chilly shrug. Despite everything, I still tried to put the children first, ensuring that they felt loved and supported in spite of the growing hostility between their parents. Even though Vanessa and I were having difficulty providing security for Liam and Chloe, every time I saw the bewilderment in their eyes or heard them inquire as to why Mommy wasn't home, my heart ached even more. One evening, when I saw Vanessa working late at her home office, I briefly observed her from the doorway, but she didn't notice me. She was absorbed in whatever was on her laptop. I wanted to express my feelings and ask why she appeared so aloof, but the words stuck in my throat, and I turned to go. As I retreated to the couch, where I usually spent my nights by myself, I couldn't help but gaze at the blank TV screen. I wondered whether the family I had fought so hard to create was falling apart, and if our marriage had reached a point where it could not be saved. With every day that went by, Vanessa and I became farther apart. These days, it wasn't just her. Late nights or her incessant Derek talk. It was her entire attitude which seemed more contemptuous and even irritated by my presence. One evening, the familiarity and warmth that had formerly characterized our relationship seemed like a faraway memory. I wiped away a tear and noticed Vanessa was leaning against the counter at the dining table, looking through her phone. I couldn't help but notice that she was giggling. "Oh, that was just something Derek sent," she said casually, without looking up. "Hey, that's hilarious." I forced a grin and turned back to the dishes, but something within me broke. Not exactly out of jealousy. As the weeks passed, it became clear to me that someone else was taking up the place where I had been in her life. Every conversation seemed to revolve around Derek, and his name became ingrained in our household. Derek believes this, or Derek claimed that. Even when he wasn't present, it seemed as though he had become a permanent presence. I tried to convince myself that this was just a professional relationship, but my intuition warned me that it wasn't. The first serious setback came when Vanessa demanded that I go to a business function with her. I wasn't excited about the prospect, as I've never been into corporate gatherings, but instead of seeing it as an opportunity to spend time with her, I felt as though I was ruining someone else's date. Derek was everywhere when we got there, greeting Vanessa with a hand lingering on her back for a bit too long. They smiled and spoke with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. I felt like I had to uncomfortably sip my drink and strike up conversations with strangers because they were the only two people in the room. I once heard Derek whispering something in Vanessa's ear, and she burst out laughing. As I observed the scene, my chest constricted as she leaned into him and delicately touched his arm. Apparently, they were so absorbed in one another that they failed to notice me waiting a few feet away. When we were alone, I asked in a stronger tone than I meant to, "What's going on between you and Derek?" Vanessa rolled her eyes in obvious annoyance. "He's just a coworker," she said, dismissing my concerns. "You're being absurd." It hurt that she didn't take my feelings seriously, and I knew this would only lead to further arguments. So I put it aside for the time being, but the tension between us was palpable. That night, as we drove home, Vanessa was clearly riveted to her phone, smiling slightly as she texted someone. I broke the silence by saying, "Vanessa," without having to inquire who it was. She groaned and put her phone down, but she still wouldn't look at me. "What now, Daniel?" she asked. "I don't like the way Derek treats you. It's insulting to me and our marriage," I said in a calm voice. She finally turned to look at me, her face displaying frustration and shock. "That's what this is about," she replied, bluntly. "You're insecure, and you're jealous." Her words, which she projected onto me, were more painful than she anticipated. I wasn't insecure. Rather, I was hurt by the developing gulf between us. By the way she seemed to value Derek over our family, I felt as though I didn't matter anymore. "I'm not jealous," I murmured quietly. "I'm trying to protect what we have." She shook her head and chuckled angrily. "Perhaps you should concentrate on fixing yourself rather than attempting to control me," she said. The conversation ended there, and we both fell silent. As I gazed out the window, my mind raced with ideas that I couldn't quite put into words. How had we arrived here? Over the next few days, I hardly recognized the woman I once called my spouse. I tried to keep my distance, hoping it would ease the tension, but Vanessa continued to bring up Derek in their casual talk as though nothing had changed. I wasn't sure if she didn't care or if she didn't realize the harm she was doing. One night, I saw her phone light up with a text. She looked at the screen, grinned, and quickly said, "I didn't need to see the name to know who it was," before placing the phone face down on the table. My heart sank. I broke the silence by asking, "Do you even want to fix this?" She paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Just our marriage?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know, Daniel, but Perhaps I'm just sick of feeling like I have to watch over your fears." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I looked at her, hoping to see a glimpse of the woman I had loved for more than 10 years. But she wasn't there. Vanessa was slipping away, and that night, while I lay awake in bed, I came to the terrible but unavoidable realization that I couldn't keep our marriage intact. If Vanessa wasn't prepared to defend us, maybe it was already finished. Vanessa's aloof behavior wasn't only impacting me anymore, it was beginning to affect the children. Liam and Chloe had noticed her absence too much for me to ignore. "Mommy's always busy. Why can't she play with us?" they'd ask. I made the difficult decision not to stay in the dark any longer.